"Mommy, why can't we go home?" asked the child on a freezing night, but when a rich CEO overheard and stepped in, he uncovered a heartbreaking truth that could destroy them all. Will his act of kindness heal the wounds of the past, or tear their fragile hope apart forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through the frosted glass doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel, warm golden light spilled onto the snow-dusted sidewalk. Clara Dawson pulled her thin jacket tighter, watching her breath form little clouds in the December air. Beside her on the cold park bench, 7-year-old Ellie snuggled closer, clutching her well-loved teddy bear. "You okay, sweetie?" Clara whispered, wrapping an arm around her daughter's small shoulders. Their single suitcase lay at their feet, containing the few possessions they'd managed to save before the eviction. Ellie's teeth chattered slightly as she nodded. "I'm just cold, Mommy." She buried her face deeper into her teddy bear's matted fur. "And tired." Clara's heart clenched. They'd spent the last 2 nights at a shelter, but it had been full today. She'd walked for hours, trying to find anywhere they could stay. Now, as evening settled over the city, she was running out of options. "Mommy?" Ellie's voice was small, trembling. "Why can't we go home?" The simple question hit Clara like a physical blow. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears that threatened to freeze on her cheeks. "Oh, sweetheart," she managed, her voice rough. "Our old apartment. We can't live there anymore. But we'll figure something out, I promise." "But all my toys are there," Ellie said. "And my books, and the wall where you marked how tall I was getting." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just held her daughter tighter, praying Ellie wouldn't notice the tears she couldn't quite hold back. The hotel's doors swung open, releasing a burst of warm air and the sound of distant piano music. A tall man in an expensive overcoat emerged, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, the merger details are settled," he was saying, his voice clipped and authoritative. "We'll begin demolition of the old properties next week." He strode past their bench, but his steps faltered when Ellie spoke again. "I miss my room," she whispered. "The ceiling had those glow-in-the-dark stars you put up. Remember, Mommy? They helped keep the dark away." The man in the overcoat had stopped completely now, his back to them, phone still held to his ear, but clearly no longer listening to whoever was on the other end. "I remember, baby," Clara murmured, rubbing Ellie's arms to warm her. "Maybe we can get new stars wherever we end up." "But it won't be the same," Ellie said, her voice wobbling. "I want to go home." The man, Daniel Whitmore, though Clara didn't know his name yet, lowered his phone slowly. His shoulder twitched, as if he meant to turn around, but stopped himself. For a long moment he stood perfectly still. Clara noticed him then, this stranger frozen in place on the sidewalk. She tensed instinctively, pulling Ellie closer, but he didn't look at them. Instead, he suddenly started walking again, disappearing through the hotel's doors. "Let's walk a little more," Clara said, although her feet ached at the thought. "Maybe we can find—" "Excuse me, ma'am." Clara looked up to see a man in a hotel uniform approaching, his expression professionally pleasant. "Yes? If you'll follow me, please. A room has been arranged for you." Clara stared at him. There must be some mistake. We don't have a reservation." The manager smiled kindly. "No mistake, ma'am. Someone has arranged this for you." He held out a keycard. "A suite on the 14th floor. It's all taken care of." Ellie sat up straighter, her eyes wide. "Really, Mommy? We can stay here?" Clara didn't move to take the keycard. Who arranged this?" "The gentleman prefers to remain anonymous," the manager said. "But I assure you, everything is in order. The suite includes room service if you're hungry." Clara's pride warred with desperation. She looked down at Ellie's hopeful face, saw the exhaustion in her daughter's eyes, felt the bitter cold seeping through their inadequate clothes. "Please, Mommy," Ellie whispered. "I'm so cold." Clara's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the keycard. "Thank you," she said quietly. Please, thank whoever did this." The manager nodded, then gestured toward the doors. "Allow me to show you to your room." As they gathered their suitcase and followed him inside, neither Clara nor Ellie noticed the man watching from behind a pillar in the lobby. Daniel Whitmore stood in silence, his phone forgotten in his hand, as the little girl with the teddy bear and her mother disappeared into the elevator. He remembered another cold night, 30 years ago, when he'd been that child without a home. The memory had hit him like a physical blow when he'd heard the girl's plaintive question. He'd tried to keep walking, to maintain the careful distance he always kept between himself and other people's problems. But he couldn't. Not this time. Daniel watched the elevator numbers climb to 14, then finally turned away. He had meetings tomorrow, acquisitions to oversee, properties to develop. He couldn't afford to let himself be distracted by every sad story he encountered. Yet, as he stepped out into the cold night, the little girl's words echoed in his mind. "I want to go home." He got into his waiting car, ordering his driver to take him to his penthouse apartment. But even as the city lights blurred past his window, he couldn't shake the image of that worn teddy bear clutched so tightly in small, cold hands. Daniel Whitmore had spent years building walls around his heart, focusing solely on success and profit. But in that moment, without his permission or control, a small crack had appeared in those carefully constructed defenses. He didn't know it yet, but that crack would change everything. The hotel room door clicked open, revealing a world Clara and Ellie Dawson hadn't known for months. Warmth embraced them immediately, chasing away the winter chill that had settled into their bones. The little girl's eyes widened at the sight of the expansive suite, her mouth forming a perfect O of wonder. "Mommy, look," Ellie whispered in awe, her worn teddy bear dangling forgotten from one hand. The room spread before them like something from a fairy tale: plush cream carpeting, sophisticated artwork on the walls, and a sitting area with velvet-upholstered chairs. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her small suitcase trembling in her grip. After weeks of shelter beds and borrowed couches, the luxury before her seemed almost unreal. The lights from the crystal chandelier reflected off the tears she couldn't quite hold back. Ellie broke free from her mother's grasp and raced toward the enormous king-sized bed. She bounced experimentally on its edge, giggling as she sank into the cloud-like mattress. "It's so soft!" she exclaimed, falling backward into the pile of decorative pillows. "Careful, honey," Clara called out automatically, though her voice lacked its usual cautionary tone. She set their battered suitcase down by the door and moved slowly into the room, running her fingers along the smooth surface of a mahogany desk. The bathroom door stood ajar, revealing gleaming marble countertops and fluffy white towels stacked in perfect pyramids. Clara caught her reflection in the massive mirror, exhausted eyes, unwashed hair, and clothes that had seen better days. The contrast between her appearance and the room's elegance made her chest tight with emotion. A soft thump drew her attention back to the main room. Ellie had discovered the flat-screen TV and was pressing her nose against its dark surface. "Can we watch cartoons, Mommy? Please?" Before Clara could answer, an envelope slipped under the door with a whisper. She retrieved it with trembling fingers, finding a meal voucher for the hotel's room service inside. The amount listed made her gasp. It was more than she'd had for food in the past week. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. They'd been surviving on vending machine snacks and free coffee shop samples for days. "Starving," Ellie declared, abandoning the TV to bounce over to her mother. Together, they pored over the room service menu, Ellie's finger trailing down the laminated pages with growing excitement. "Can I have the chocolate chip pancakes, even though it's nighttime?" Clara smiled, her first genuine smile in what felt like forever. "Just this once," she said, reaching for the phone. She ordered pancakes for Ellie and a sandwich for herself, her voice shaking slightly as she gave their room number to the kitchen staff. While they waited for the food, Ellie explored every corner of the suite. She discovered little soaps shaped like seashells, tiny bottles of shampoo, and a notepad with the hotel's golden logo. Each discovery brought fresh exclamations of delight that made Clara's heart both soar and ache. When their food arrived, they sat cross-legged on the massive bed, using crisp white napkins as makeshift placemats. Ellie devoured her pancakes with the enthusiasm of a child who'd known hunger, but remembered to say thank you to the room service waiter, making Clara proud despite their circumstances. After dinner, Clara helped Ellie wash up in the marble bathroom. The little girl giggled at the oversized bathtub and the multiple shower heads, declaring it was like a water park. Clean, and wearing her worn but comfortable pajamas, Ellie climbed into bed, her teddy bear tucked securely under one arm. "Time for prayers," Ellie announced solemnly, folding her small hands together. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, stroking her daughter's damp hair. "Dear God," Ellie began, her voice clear and sincere, "thank you for the pancakes, and the soft bed, and the nice warm room, and thank you for sending us an angel to help us tonight. Please bless Mommy and keep her from being sad, and bless my teddy bear, and bless our angel, even though we don't know who they are. Amen." Clara's throat tightened at her daughter's words. "Amen," she whispered, tucking the blankets around Ellie's shoulders. "Mommy?" Ellie's voice was already heavy with sleep. "Do you think we'll be okay now?" Clara kissed her daughter's forehead, feeling a tiny spark of hope flutter in her chest for the first time in weeks. "Get some sleep, sweetheart. We're safe and warm tonight, and that's what matters." As Ellie's breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep, Clara moved to the window. She pulled back the heavy curtain and gazed out at the city lights twinkling against the dark winter sky. Somewhere out there, someone had shown them kindness when they needed it most. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, allowing herself to believe, just for a moment, that things might get better. Several floors above, in his penthouse suite, Daniel Whitmore stood on his private balcony. The night air bit through his expensive wool coat, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the warm glow of a window several floors below, where he knew a mother and daughter were finding refuge from the cold. His hands gripped the balcony railing as memories of his own childhood surfaced. The gnawing ache of hunger, the bitter cold of winters without proper heating, the shame of wearing threadbare clothes to school. The little girl's question from earlier echoed in his mind. "Mommy, why can't we go home?" Daniel's jaw clenched as he watched their room light flicker, imagining the small family settling in for the night. "Not again," he whispered into the darkness. "Not if I can help it." Morning sunlight streamed through the hotel suite's heavy curtains, painting golden stripes across Clara's face. For the first time in weeks, her eyes opened without the weight of exhaustion. The mattress felt like a cloud beneath her, so different from the hard shelter beds they'd endured recently. Next to her, Ellie was still curled up in a tight ball, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. Clara gently brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's peaceful face. "Sweetie," she whispered, "time to wake up." Ellie's eyes fluttered open, confusion crossing her features before a smile spread across her face. "The nice hotel," she said softly. "It wasn't a dream." "No, baby, it wasn't." Clara's throat tightened. "And guess what? They have a breakfast buffet downstairs." Ellie bounced up, suddenly wide awake. "With pancakes? Maybe. Let's get dressed and find out." They took their time getting ready, savoring the luxury of the marble bathroom with its fluffy towels and sweet-smelling soap. Clara helped Ellie brush her teeth, both of them giggling at their reflections in the spotless mirror. The hotel's restaurant was bustling with business travelers in suits and families on vacation. Clara felt out of place in her worn jeans and simple sweater, but the hostess greeted them warmly and showed them to a table. "Mommy, look at all the food!" Ellie's eyes were wide as saucers as she took in the long buffet tables, laden with fresh fruit, pastries, and hot dishes. "Let's get you a plate," Clara said, taking her daughter's hand. They were halfway to the buffet when Ellie suddenly jerked forward, bumping into someone's legs. "Oh!" a deep voice exclaimed. Strong hands steadied Ellie before she could fall. Clara looked up into kind brown eyes set in a handsome face. The man wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than she used to make in a month. "I'm so sorry," Clara apologized, pulling Ellie closer. "No harm done," the man said with a gentle smile. He knelt down to Ellie's level. "Are you okay?" Ellie nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. Sorry I bumped you." "I'm glad you're here for breakfast," he said warmly. "I recommend the blueberry pancakes." Ellie's face lit up. "They have blueberry pancakes?" The man chuckled and stood. "They certainly do. Enjoy your breakfast, ladies." "Thank you," Clara said, meaning more than just the pancake recommendation. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Thank you for everything." He gave her an unreadable look before nodding and continuing on his way. The breakfast was everything they could have hoped for. Ellie devoured 2 blueberry pancakes while Clara savored real coffee and fresh fruit. It felt almost normal, like their life before everything fell apart. After breakfast, Clara settled Ellie with her coloring books and the hotel TV while she began her daily job search on her phone. Her savings were nearly gone, and even this unexpected kindness couldn't last forever. The local coffee shop had a "Help Wanted" sign. Clara made a note of the address, then clicked on the local news website to check for other listings. That's when she saw it. The headline read, "Whitmore Development's latest luxury project breaks ground." Below was a photo of the man from Breakfast, Daniel Whitmore, standing with a group of executives in hard hats. His smile was different in the photo, harder, more corporate. Clara's hands began to shake as she read further. The article detailed the ambitious development project that had bought out her entire apartment complex, forcing dozens of families to relocate with minimal compensation. The same project that had left her and Ellie homeless when she couldn't find an affordable alternative in time. "Whitmore Development continues to transform the city's landscape," the article proclaimed. CEO Daniel Whitmore promises this latest luxury residential complex will elevate the neighborhood to new heights. The phone slipped from Clara's numb fingers onto the plush hotel carpet. The man who had smiled so kindly at her daughter, who had recommended pancakes, who had possibly even arranged this room for them. He was the same man responsible for destroying their lives. Memory clicked into place. His face on newsletters from the development company, on notices delivered to her door, on news reports she'd tried to ignore until it was too late. How had she not recognized him immediately? Ellie's happy humming from the other room felt like a knife in Clara's heart. She picked up the complimentary newspaper from the desk, finding the same story in print. The paper crumpled in her clenched fists as tears blurred her vision. "It was him," she whispered, her voice breaking. The warmth of the room suddenly felt like a mockery, the luxury, a cruel joke. Every gentle word, every kind gesture had come from the very man who had taken away their home. Behind her, Ellie continued to color, oblivious to her mother's distress, while the morning sun that had seemed so promising now cast harsh shadows across the crumpled newspaper in Clara's hands. Clara paced the hotel suite all afternoon, the crumpled newspaper article clutched in her hand. Every few minutes, she smoothed it out, staring at Daniel Whitmore's polished face in the photo, hoping somehow she was wrong. But there it was in black and white. His company's logo stamped across the development plans that had turned her life upside down. As evening approached, she knelt beside Ellie, who was coloring on the plush carpet. "Sweetie, I need to talk to someone downstairs. Will you be okay here for a few minutes? Lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone except me." Ellie nodded solemnly, her crayon pausing mid-stroke. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" "Everything's fine," Clara assured her, though her trembling hands betrayed her. She kissed Ellie's forehead and headed for the door, her heart pounding with each step toward the elevator. The hotel lobby sparkled with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Clara's worn sneakers squeaked against the polished surface as she approached the front desk. "Is Mr. Whitmore still in the building?" The concierge's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Whitmore's actually right over there, ma'am." He gestured toward the bar area. Daniel sat alone at a small table, his suit jacket draped over the chair beside him, typing on his phone. He looked different now that she knew who he was, less like a kind stranger and more like the corporate shark she'd read about in the papers. Clara marched over, the newspaper article clenched in her fist. "Mr. Whitmore?" He looked up, his expression brightening with recognition. "Mrs. Dawson, how are you and Ellie settling in?" "Don't." Clara's voice shook. "Don't pretend you care about us." She slapped the newspaper article onto his table. "Your company, your development project, the one that kicked dozens of families out of their homes. That's why we're here, living on charity." Daniel's face drained of color as he stared at the article. The busy lobby seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in this horrible moment of truth. I wanted to thank you, Clara continued, her words sharp and bitter, for the room. But I won't accept help from the man who destroyed everything we had. Mrs. Dawson. Clara, please, let me explain. Daniel stood up, his usual confidence cracking. I didn't know. Didn't know what? That real people lived in those buildings? That some of us couldn't just pack up and move to a luxury condo? Clara's voice cracked. My husband died serving this country, and that apartment was all we had left. Now it's going to be torn down for your precious development. Daniel's shoulders slumped. He didn't try to defend himself or offer excuses. Instead, he said quietly, You're right, and I want to make this right. Make it right? Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Unless you can turn back time and give us our home back, there's nothing to make right. We'll find our own way. She turned to leave, then spun back. And Mr. Whitmore, don't try to ease your conscience with any more acts of charity. We don't want them. She walked away, her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill. Behind her, she heard Daniel call out, Please, let me help. There are other properties. But Clara kept walking, jabbing the elevator button with trembling fingers. Only when the doors closed did she allow herself to cry, quick, angry tears that she wiped away before reaching her floor. Ellie was right where Clara had left her, surrounded by crayons and paper. She looked up with a bright smile that made Clara's heart ache. Mommy, look what I drew. Clara forced herself to smile, kneeling beside her daughter. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that Mr. Daniel? Ellie nodded proudly, pointing to a tall stick figure in what appeared to be a suit. That's him, and that's us next to him. See? He looks happy in my picture. Clara studied the childish drawing, 3 figures holding hands, all wearing giant smiles. Why did you draw him, honey? Because he helped us, Ellie said simply. And because he looks lonely, like how you looked lonely after Daddy went to heaven. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She gathered Ellie into her arms, holding her close. Time for bed, sweetie. It's getting late. After their bedtime routine, teeth brushed, pajamas on, prayers said, Clara tucked Ellie into the huge hotel bed. The white duvet swallowed her small frame, making her look even tinier than usual. Mommy? Ellie's voice was sleepy. I like Mr. Daniel. He looks lonely. Clara's hand hesitated on the light switch. She thought of Daniel's face when she'd confronted him, the way his confident facade had crumbled. For a moment, she'd glimpsed something raw and human beneath the corporate exterior, something that reminded her of herself. Good night, sweetheart, she whispered, clicking off the light. She stood in the darkness, listening to Ellie's breathing grow steady and deep, her daughter's innocent observation echoing in her mind. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city streets as Clara gripped her folder of resumes, her heels clicking against the cold pavement. She'd already visited 6 businesses, and each time the response had been the same. We'll keep your application on file. She knew what that meant. Another polite rejection. Her phone buzzed. The daycare where she'd left Ellie was calling. Clara's heart jumped into her throat, but it was just a reminder that pickup time was in 4 hours. 4 hours to find something, anything, to keep them off the streets when their mysterious hotel stay inevitably ended. At a small cafe, Clara sat down to rest her feet and count the few dollars left in her wallet. The elderly woman at the next table noticed her stack of resumes. Looking for work, dear? The woman asked, stirring her tea. Clara nodded, trying to maintain a brave smile. Yes, ma'am. Anything at this point. Well, as it happens, I was just at Whitmore Enterprises this morning. My son works in accounting there. They're hiring a new receptionist. The last one just got married and moved away. Clara's stomach turned at the mention of Whitmore. But before she could respond, the woman continued. It's good pay, from what I hear. Benefits, too. In this economy, that's not something to pass up. Clara stared into her cooling coffee. The woman was right. Benefits meant health insurance for Ellie. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind, and her pride wavered. 20 minutes later, Clara stood in the gleaming lobby of Whitmore Enterprises. The marble floors reflected the morning light, and everything sparkled with wealth and power. She approached the temporary receptionist, an older woman who looked relieved to see her. "I'm here, about the receptionist position," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. The HR manager interviewed her immediately. He was impressed by her previous office experience and her composed demeanor. "When can you start?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Clara answered without hesitation. "Excellent. Let me just run this up to Mr. Whitmore for final approval." "Is that necessary?" Clara interrupted, then caught herself. "I mean, surely he has more important things to—" "Standard procedure for all new hires," the manager explained, already heading toward the elevator. Clara sat rigid in her chair, her heart pounding. A few minutes later, the manager returned, looking puzzled but pleased. "Mr. Whitmore approved your hire immediately. In fact, he's authorized a slightly higher starting salary than we initially discussed." He slid the offer letter across the desk. Clara's eyes widened at the number. It was enough. Enough for an apartment deposit. Enough for groceries. Enough to start rebuilding their lives. Her hand trembled as she signed the paperwork. The next morning, Clara arrived early, determined to prove herself. She learned the phone system, memorized the staff directory, and handled every visitor with professional courtesy. When Daniel stepped out of the elevator at 9, he paused at her desk. "Good morning, Mrs. Dawson," he said formally. "Mr. Whitmore," she replied, her tone equally professional. He nodded, accepting the stack of messages she held out. "I trust everything is satisfactory?" "Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." The words tasted strange in her mouth, thanking him for anything. But she meant them. Throughout the day, Clara noticed how Daniel kept his distance, respecting her space. He asked nothing personal, made no mention of their previous encounters, and treated her exactly like any other employee. Somehow, that made it easier. At 5 o'clock, Clara gathered her things and headed to pick up Ellie from the daycare center 2 blocks away. Her daughter bounced out the door, pigtails flying. "Mommy, how was your new job? Did you see Mr. Daniel?" "Yes, honey," Clara said, taking Ellie's small hand in hers. "I did." They walked together down the sidewalk, Ellie chattering about her day. Clara pulled out her paycheck stub, running her thumb over the numbers. It wasn't just the money. It was dignity, independence, a way forward that she'd earned herself. "It's a start," she murmured, tucking the stub into her purse. Across the street, in a black sedan with tinted windows, Daniel Whitmore sat quietly watching the mother and daughter make their way home. He made no move to get out or make his presence known. He simply observed their newfound hope, knowing that sometimes the best help was simply providing an opportunity for someone to help themselves. Clara's new routine settled into a familiar rhythm. Each morning she'd wake Ellie early in their hotel room, helping her daughter brush her teeth at the marble sink that still felt too fancy for comfort. The hotel staff had grown used to their presence, offering warm smiles and occasional treats for Ellie. "Remember, sweetie, straight to the bus after school," Clara reminded Ellie as they hurried through the hotel lobby. Her daughter's backpack bounced with each step, a bright pink splash of color against the hotel's muted elegance. At the front desk of Whitmore Enterprises, Clara answered phones and directed visitors with practiced efficiency. She kept her head down, focused on the work, grateful for the steady income, even if it came from a source she'd rather avoid. The irony wasn't lost on her, working for the very company that had upended her life. Every time Daniel Whitmore passed through the lobby, Clara stiffened. She'd give him the same polite nod she offered any other executive, nothing more. He seemed to understand, keeping his distance, though she occasionally caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. But Ellie had other ideas. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara looked up from her computer to find Ellie perched on one of the lobby's leather chairs, her homework spread across her lap, chattering away to none other than Daniel Whitmore himself. "And this is my family," Ellie was saying, holding up a crayon drawing. "That's Mommy, and that's me, and that's Mr. Snuggles." She pointed to the teddy bear she'd drawn with remarkable detail for a 7-year-old. Daniel crouched beside the chair, his expensive suit wrinkling as he studied the artwork with genuine interest. "You're quite the artist, Ellie. I especially like how you drew the clouds." Clara's heart clenched. She started to rise from her desk, but Ellie's laugh, a sound she hadn't heard enough lately, made her hesitate. The scene repeated itself over the next few days. Ellie would finish her homework, then wait in the lobby until Daniel passed by. Sometimes they'd talk about her drawings, other times about the books she was reading in school. Once, Clara overheard them discussing The Very Hungry Caterpillar, with Daniel doing different voices for each food item. "Did you know Mr. Daniel likes butterflies too?" Ellie announced one evening as Clara tucked her into bed. "He said they remind him of hope." Clara sat on the edge of the hotel bed, smoothing Ellie's hair. "Honey, I know Mr. Daniel is nice to you, but we can't get too attached, okay? This is just temporary." "But why? He looks sad when he thinks nobody's watching." "Like you do sometimes." Clara's throat tightened. "It's complicated, sweetie." The next day, Clara caught Daniel and Ellie sharing a cookie in the lobby, heads bent over another of Ellie's drawings. She waited until Ellie skipped off to the bathroom before approaching him. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, professionally, "I appreciate your kindness to my daughter, but I need to ask you to keep your distance." Daniel stood, brushing cookie crumbs from his suit. "Clara, I assure you—" "Please," she cut him off. "You may own this building and you may be my employer, but Ellie is all I have. I can't have her getting attached to someone who—" She trailed off, the words "destroyed our home" hanging unspoken between them. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. He nodded once, straightened his tie, and walked away without another word. That evening, Daniel took a different route home from the office. The winter air bit at his face as he walked past the downtown shelter he usually avoided. He'd seen it countless times, but had never really looked at it before. Through the windows, he could see people lined up for dinner. A mother cradled a baby, while her older child clutched a worn backpack. An elderly man in a threadbare coat helped a younger man with a cane find a seat. Their faces were tired but dignified, each carrying stories he'd trained himself not to see. Daniel stopped, his expensive shoes rooted to the sidewalk. In one woman's face, he saw his own mother's determination. In a child's worried eyes, he recognized his younger self, counting pennies for bread. The memories he'd buried under years of success and ambition rose to the surface, impossible to ignore. A volunteer inside caught his eye through the window. She smiled, probably expecting him to come in and help. Instead, Daniel turned away, his steps quick and uneven on the pavement. But the images stayed with him. The mothers, the children, the elderly, people who could have been him, who once were him, before life took different turns. He walked faster, as if he could outpace the thoughts crowding his mind. But Ellie's innocent drawings, Clara's fierce protection of her daughter, and now these faces at the shelter, they all blurred together, demanding something from him he wasn't sure he knew how to give. The homeless shelter grew smaller behind him, but its presence seemed to follow him home, a shadow he couldn't shake off as easily as he once did. The morning sun had barely risen when Daniel Whitmore stepped out of his black Mercedes, dressed in casual clothes instead of his usual tailored suit. The homeless shelter's weathered brick building stood before him, its windows clouded with age. A sign reading Hope Harbor Shelter hung slightly crooked above the entrance. His expensive leather shoes crunched on salt-covered concrete as he approached the door. Inside, the smell of coffee and slightly burnt toast filled the air. A few early risers huddled around plastic tables, their shoulders hunched over steaming cups. "Can I help you?" A woman in her 60s approached him, her gray hair tied back in a neat bun. Her name tag read, "Margaret, Director." "Yes, I." Daniel cleared his throat. "I'd like to make a donation." Anonymously. Margaret's eyes brightened, though fatigue lines creased her face. "That's very kind. Would you like a tour first? See where the money might go?" Daniel nodded, following her through the shelter. The wooden floors creaked beneath their feet. In one room, cots lined the walls, each precisely spaced but worn from use. A young mother folded a thin blanket while her son, no older than Ellie, clutched a tattered action figure. "We're at capacity most nights," Margaret explained, her voice heavy. "It's gotten worse since the new developments started going up. People can't afford the rising rents." Daniel's stomach tightened. "How many families?" 28 right now. Used to be mostly single folks, but lately. She shook her head. The luxury condos are pushing everyone out. That new Whitmore project especially cleared out 3 affordable apartment buildings. Daniel flinched at his own name. What do they need most? Everything. Blankets, toiletries, food. But what they really need is affordable housing. Margaret's eyes met his directly. They need their homes back. Back at the front desk, Daniel wrote a check that made Margaret's eyes widen. Please, he insisted, keep my name out of it. Meanwhile, across town at Whitmore Enterprises, Clara sat at the reception desk, watching Ellie color in a spare notebook. The girl had insisted on coming to work with Clara during her lunch break, though Clara suspected it wasn't just to see her. Right on schedule, Daniel emerged from the elevator. Ellie's face lit up instantly. "Mr. Daniel," she called out, waving her crayon in the air. "Want to see my drawing?" Clara tensed as Daniel approached, his usual businessman facade softening as he crouched beside Ellie's chair. "I'd love to," he said, his voice gentler than Clara had ever heard it in business meetings. "It's a butterfly garden," Ellie explained, pointing to colorful scribbles. "Like the one at our old house. Remember, Mommy? With all the flowers?" Clara's throat tightened. "Yes, baby, I remember." Daniel glanced at Clara, then back to Ellie. "You know, I've never had a garden. What else grew there?" "Mommy planted tomatoes, and pretty purple flowers that smelled good. Lavender," Clara said quietly, almost against her will. They were lavender. For the next 10 minutes, Clara watched as her daughter chatted animatedly with Daniel about gardens, butterflies, and her favorite colors. The way he listened, really listened, to every word made something twist in Clara's chest. She didn't want to admit how natural they looked together, how Ellie's eyes sparkled when she made him laugh. "Time for us to go," Clara announced abruptly, gathering Ellie's crayons. "Say goodbye, sweetie." "Bye, Mr. Daniel." Ellie hugged his leg before Clara could stop her. Daniel's surprised expression quickly melted into warmth. That evening, Clara worked late filing paperwork. When she finally headed to the lobby to collect Ellie from the children's waiting area, she found her daughter sprawled on her stomach, tongue stuck out in concentration as she drew. "Ready to head up to our room?" Clara asked, trying not to think of the hotel suite as home. "Almost done." Ellie held up her picture proudly. Clara's breath caught. There on the paper were 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall with long hair, one small with pigtails, and one in what was clearly meant to be a business suit. They stood in front of what looked like a house, complete with a butterfly garden. "See? It's us," Ellie beamed. "You, me, and Mr. Daniel. Can we show him tomorrow?" Clara carefully took the drawing, studying the hopeful smiles Ellie had drawn on each face. "We'll see, sweetie. Time for bed now." As they rode the elevator up to their floor, Clara slipped the drawing into her purse, her fingers lingering on the edge of the paper. She couldn't bring herself to crumple it, but she couldn't bear to look at it either, this simple illustration of her daughter's wishes that made her heart ache with confusion and fear. In their room, as Ellie brushed her teeth, Clara sat on the edge of the plush hotel bed. She pulled out the drawing again, tracing the stick figure family with her fingertip. The Daniel in the picture smiled broadly, nothing like the stern CEO she'd first met. But lately, when he was with Ellie, Clara quickly tucked the drawing away as Ellie bounced into the room. She couldn't let her daughter get too attached. She couldn't let herself get too attached. No matter how much things seemed to be changing, she had to remember who Daniel Whitmore really was, the man whose company had taken their home. But as she kissed Ellie goodnight, her daughter's words echoed in her mind. "Mr. Daniel looks less sad when he's with us, Mommy." Clara turned off the light, the drawing burning a hole in her purse, her heart heavy with the weight of what she feared might be happening, not just to Ellie, but to herself as well. Clara sat at her reception desk, organizing files while keeping one eye on the steady stream of visitors passing through Whitmore Enterprises' gleaming lobby. The marble floors echoed with clicking heels and hushed conversations. She had gotten used to the rhythm of corporate life over the past few weeks, even if she still felt like an outsider. 2 marketing executives stopped near her desk, their voices carrying despite their attempts at whispering. "Did you see the research Daniel requested?" the first woman asked, adjusting her designer blazer. "All about affordable housing initiatives and community development, so unlike him." "I heard he's been visiting shelters," the second woman replied, shaking her head in disbelief. "Something's definitely changed. He canceled 3 luxury development meetings last week." Clara pretended to focus on her computer screen, but her fingers stilled over the keyboard. The executives moved on, their conversation fading into the lobby's ambient noise. She thought about Daniel's recent behavior, how he'd grown quieter, more thoughtful, less the ruthless CEO she'd first encountered. Later that afternoon, Clara was organizing the week's meeting schedule when Daniel emerged from the elevator. Instead of passing by with his usual brisk nod, he paused at her desk. "Clara, do you have a moment?" She looked up, surprised by the uncertainty in his voice. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore? Please, call me Daniel." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she'd noticed he made when nervous. "I'd like your opinion on something if you're willing." Clara hesitated, then nodded. Daniel spread several documents across her desk: blueprints, demographic studies, and community impact reports. "These are preliminary plans for converting some of our existing properties into mixed-income housing. You have first-hand experience with housing insecurity. What do you see missing here?" She stared at him, caught off guard by his directness. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the professional distance she'd carefully constructed. But another part remembered Ellie's words about Daniel looking lonely, and the genuine interest in his eyes as he waited for her response. "You really want my honest opinion?" she asked. "Please." Clara took a deep breath and pointed to the blueprints. "These units are too small for families. Single parents often have multiple children. And there's no designated play area, no community space." Her finger moved to another page. "The income requirements are still too high. Most families I know from the shelter wouldn't qualify." She expected Daniel to dismiss her concerns, but instead he pulled out a pen and started taking notes. "What else?" For the next hour, Clara found herself sharing insights from her own experience: the importance of being near public transportation, the need for flexible lease terms, the value of on-site childcare options. Daniel listened intently, asking questions and revising plans as they talked. Over the following days, Clara noticed changes in the project documents that crossed her desk. Her suggestions appeared in updated blueprints and policy drafts. She overheard Daniel in meetings, advocating for features she'd recommended, challenging his team to think differently about community impact. One afternoon, while delivering reports to his office, she saw a familiar crayon drawing pinned to his bulletin board: Ellie's sketch of the 3 of them holding hands. The sight made her chest tighten with conflicting emotions. A week later, Daniel approached her desk just before closing time. He looked different than usual, his tie loosened, jacket slung over his arm, more human somehow. "Clara, I know this might be overstepping, but there's this small Italian restaurant I go to sometimes. Family-owned, nothing fancy. Would you and Ellie like to join me for dinner?" Before Clara could form a response, Ellie burst through the lobby doors, returning from the after-school program she attended nearby. "Mommy! Mr. Daniel!" She bounced over to them, her backpack covered in glitter stickers, catching the late afternoon light. Daniel's face softened as it always did around Ellie. "Hello there, young artist. I was just asking your mom if you two would like to have dinner with me." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we, Mommy? Please?" She clutched Clara's arm, practically vibrating with excitement. "Is it the place with the red and white checkered tablecloths? I see you go there sometimes when I'm at the playground." Clara looked between her daughter's hopeful face and Daniel's careful smile. She opened her mouth to decline politely, but Ellie's joy was impossible to resist. "Please, Mommy. Mr. Daniel looks like he needs company for dinner. Nobody should eat alone." Clara saw something flicker in Daniel's eyes at Ellie's words, a moment of vulnerability quickly masked. She remembered the marketing executive's whispered conversations, the shelter visits, the way he'd actually listened to her ideas. Maybe, she thought, people really could change. "The food is excellent," Daniel offered quietly. And very kid-friendly. Ellie bounced on her toes, still holding Clara's arm. They must have spaghetti. Do they have spaghetti, Mr. Daniel? Before Clara could formulate another excuse, she heard herself say, "What time?" The small Italian restaurant was tucked away on a quiet street corner, its warm yellow lights glowing invitingly through steamy windows. Red and white checkered tablecloths covered intimate tables, and the rich aroma of garlic and fresh herbs filled the air. Clara watched as Daniel held the door open for them, noting how different he looked outside the office, more relaxed in a simple sweater instead of his usual sharp suits. "Maria," Daniel called out warmly to an elderly woman behind the counter. "My usual table, please?" The woman's face lit up. "Daniel, and you brought guests." She shuffled over, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun. "Such a beautiful family you've brought." Clara opened her mouth to correct her, but Ellie was already bouncing on her toes. "I'm Ellie, and this is my mom." Maria led them to a cozy corner booth, worn but comfortable. Ellie slid in first, then Clara, while Daniel took the seat across from them. The leather cushions creaked softly as they settled in. "I've been coming here for 15 years, Daniel said, his voice softer than Clara had ever heard it. "Since before." He gestured vaguely at his expensive watch, a subtle reference to his wealth. Clara noticed how his shoulders relaxed as he looked around the humble restaurant. It was nothing like the luxury establishments she'd imagined him frequenting. The walls were covered with old family photos, and somewhere in the kitchen, pots clattered accompanied by rapid-fire Italian. Maria brought them fresh bread and butter without being asked. "The usual for you, Daniel? Please." He smiled, then turned to Clara and Ellie. "Everything here is amazing, but the lasagna. That's what got me through some of the hardest times." Ellie reached for a piece of bread, carefully spreading butter on it. "Did you come here when you were little like me?" Something flickered across Daniel's face. Vulnerability, Clara realized. She'd never seen that expression at the office. "Actually," he began, his fingers tracing patterns on the worn tablecloth. "When I was your age, I couldn't afford to eat at restaurants." He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "My mom and we lived in our car for a while." Clara's fork clattered against her water glass. She hadn't expected that. "In a car?" Ellie's eyes went wide. "Like camping?" "Not exactly." Daniel's smile was sad. "We didn't have a home for almost a year. Mom worked 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough. We'd park in different places each night, trying to stay warm." Clara found herself leaning forward, her own struggles suddenly reflected in his words. "What happened?" "Maria's husband. He's in the kitchen now. Found us parked behind the restaurant one winter night. Instead of shooing us away, they gave us food. Eventually, they helped Mom find a better job. An apartment." Daniel's voice grew thick. "That's why I keep coming back. They showed me what kindness really means." The dinner arrived, steaming plates of pasta and rich sauce. Clara watched as Daniel took his first bite, closing his eyes in appreciation. It wasn't for show, she realized. This place truly meant something to him. Ellie twirled spaghetti around her fork with intense concentration. "But you're not poor anymore. You have a big office, and everything," Daniel chuckled, but his eyes remained serious. "That's true, but I never want to forget where I came from." "Sometimes," he glanced at Clara. "I think I did forget for a while. Got caught up in building bigger things, making more money. Lost sight of what really matters." Clara felt something shift inside her chest. The man across the table wasn't the cold CEO she'd imagined. He was someone who'd known hunger, fear, uncertainty, just like her. Their conversation flowed easier after that, sharing stories between bites of perfectly cooked pasta. Clara found herself laughing at Daniel's description of his first attempt at cooking, which had apparently set off 3 fire alarms. When the dishes were cleared, Ellie sat up straight, her eyes sparkling. "Can we have dessert, please?" "Ellie," Clara started to protest. But Daniel was already grinning. "Maria's tiramisu is legendary," he said. "We absolutely have to have dessert." "For everybody," Ellie declared with authority, making both adults laugh. The dessert arrived, 3 generous portions of tiramisu, dusted with cocoa powder. Ellie took a huge bite, getting cream on her nose. Clara reached out with a napkin to wipe it off, catching Daniel's eye as she did. He was watching them with a gentle expression she'd never seen before. The walk home was peaceful, with Ellie skipping ahead under the streetlights, her shadow dancing on the sidewalk. The night air was cool but not uncomfortable, and stars peeked through gaps in the city's light pollution. Clara felt warm inside, and not just from the wine they'd shared at dinner. She felt peaceful, happy even. It scared her a little how natural the evening had felt. "Ellie," she called softly, watching her daughter twirl under a street lamp. "Don't get too close." But Ellie just turned to her, face glowing with innocent joy. "He already feels like family." The words hit Clara like a gentle wave, washing away her carefully constructed walls. She watched her daughter skip ahead again, wondering when everything had started to change. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant decorations. Clara stood at the entrance, feeling out of place despite the beautiful navy blue gown that had been donated by a local charity. She smoothed the silk fabric nervously, watching the crowd of well-dressed executives and socialites mingle. Ellie bounced excitedly beside her in a pretty pink dress, her hair done up in neat braids. "Mommy, you look like a princess!" she exclaimed, tugging at Clara's hand. "Thank you, sweetheart." Clara managed a small smile, though her stomach was tied in knots. She still wasn't sure why she'd agreed to come tonight. Daniel had been persistent, promising something special, but Clara had learned to be wary of surprises. "Clara!" Daniel's voice cut through her thoughts. He approached them in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his usual business demeanor softened by a genuine smile. "I'm so glad you both made it." "Mr. Daniel!" Ellie ran to him for a hug, which he returned warmly. Clara noticed how natural their interaction had become over the past weeks. "You look lovely," Daniel said to Clara, his eyes lingering for a moment before he cleared his throat. "Both of you do." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. This island. Quite an event." She gestured to the ornate surroundings. "Wait until you see what's coming," Daniel replied with a mysterious smile. "For now, please enjoy yourselves. There's a children's area set up in the corner with other kids and supervision." Ellie's eyes lit up at the sight of the craft tables and games. "Can I go, Mom? Please?" Clara nodded, watching her daughter skip away. Left alone with Daniel, she felt that familiar tension, the pull between wanting to trust him and remembering who he was. The evening progressed with speeches about charitable giving and community involvement. Clara sat at a table near the front, picking at her elaborate dinner while various executives took the stage. Finally, Daniel stood up to speak. The room fell silent as he approached the microphone. He looked different somehow, more vulnerable than his usual confident self. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Tonight, I want to announce something personal. Something that will change the direction of Whitmore Enterprises forever." He paused, his eyes finding Clara's in the crowd. "Many of you know me as a businessman focused on luxury developments. What you don't know is that I was once a child who lived in a car with my mother, who didn't know where our next meal would come from." A murmur went through the crowd. Clara sat up straighter, remembering their conversation at the Italian restaurant. Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "Recently, I've been reminded of those days, and of the people we sometimes hurt in our pursuit of profit. Tonight, I'm announcing the Thomas Dawson Veterans Housing Initiative." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas, her late husband's name. She felt tears welling up in her eyes. "This program will dedicate $50 million to creating affordable housing specifically for veterans and their families," Daniel explained. "Named after a brave soldier who served his country with honor, this initiative will ensure that no veteran's family ever faces homelessness in our city again." The ballroom erupted in applause. Through her tears, Clara saw Ellie beaming from her spot with the other children. Daniel wasn't finished. "Thomas Dawson gave his life serving our country. His widow and daughter showed me what true courage looks like. The courage to stand up for what's right, even against overwhelming odds." His voice softened. "They taught me that success isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch." More applause filled the room, but Clara barely heard it. She was transported back to memories of Thomas, his laugh, his dedication to helping others, his dreams of making their community better. Daniel had found a way to make those dreams live on. After the speech, as the orchestra began to play, Daniel made his way to Clara's table. He extended his hand. "Would you dance with me?" Clara hesitated only briefly before taking it. He led her to the dance floor, where other couples were already swaying to the soft music. His hand was warm on her waist, steady and respectful. "Why?" she whispered as they moved to the music. "Why did you do this?" Daniel's eyes met hers, full of emotion. "Because your husband was a hero. Because you and Ellie showed me what really matters. Because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because sometimes we get second chances to do the right thing." They danced in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Clara felt something shift in her heart, the last of her walls crumbling. From the edge of the dance floor, Ellie watched them with shining eyes, clutching her teddy bear. Clara caught her daughter's gaze and saw pure joy there. For the first time in months, she felt truly hopeful about their future. As they turned slowly on the dance floor, Clara realized she was seeing Daniel clearly at last. Not as the ruthless CEO who had taken their home, but as someone who had found his way back to his humanity. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, all the pain and anger of the past months dissolved into something new and unexpected. The music played on, and they continued to dance, neither wanting the moment to end. Around them, the gala continued in full swing, but in their small space on the dance floor, time seemed to stand still. The spring sunshine warmed the park bench where Clara sat, watching Ellie chase butterflies across the fresh grass. Daniel approached with 3 ice cream cones, carefully balanced in his hands, his suit jacket draped over one arm. "One strawberry for the princess," he said, handing a cone to Ellie, who bounced over with rosy cheeks. "And vanilla for the queen." He offered the second cone to Clara with a gentle smile. "Thank you," Clara said softly, accepting the ice cream. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt a familiar flutter in her chest. These little moments had become more frequent since the gala, and she found herself looking forward to them. Ellie plopped down between them, ice cream already smeared around her mouth. "Mommy, look! Mr. Daniel got chocolate just like I told him he should." Clara watched as Daniel took a big bite of his cone, making an exaggerated sound that sent Ellie into giggles. "You were right, Ellie. Chocolate was definitely the way to go." The afternoon sun painted everything in golden light as they sat together, sharing stories and laughter. Clara noticed how Daniel always seemed to have time for them now, despite running a massive company. He'd shown up at Ellie's school art fair last week, proudly purchasing her finger-painted masterpiece for his office. The genuine joy on his face, when Ellie had hugged him in thanks, made Clara's heart skip a beat. "Can we feed the ducks?" Ellie asked, pointing to the pond where a family of mallards paddled lazily. Daniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small paper bag. "I might have come prepared," he said with a wink. Clara raised an eyebrow. "You just happen to carry duck food in your $1,000 briefcase?" "Well, a certain little bird told me this was her favorite park activity." He glanced at Ellie, who beamed proudly. They walked to the pond's edge together, Ellie between them, each holding one of her hands. As they tossed breadcrumbs to the eager ducks, Clara couldn't help but notice how natural it felt. The 3 of them together like this. Later that week, Daniel surprised them by showing up at Ellie's school science fair. He arrived just as Ellie was explaining her project about plant growth to the judges, wearing his usual crisp suit but with a handmade paper flower pinned to his lapel, Ellie's handiwork from their last arts and crafts session. "Look who made it!" Ellie exclaimed, running to give him a hug. Clara watched as Daniel's whole demeanor softened, the way it always did around her daughter. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo," he said, straightening the flower on his jacket. "Now tell me all about these plants of yours." Clara stood back, observing as Daniel listened intently to Ellie's detailed explanation of her experiment. He asked thoughtful questions, praised her scientific method, and even took notes on his phone. The corporate titan who once seemed so cold was nowhere to be seen. In his place was simply a man who cared deeply. That weekend, they had a picnic in the courtyard of the new affordable housing complex Daniel was building. Construction workers tipped their hard hats as they passed, and Clara noticed how Daniel knew each of them by name. He'd been spending more time on site lately, ensuring everything met the highest standards. "The community center will be right there," he explained, pointing to a foundation being laid, "with after-school programs and job training facilities." "It's amazing," Clara admitted, watching Ellie arrange their sandwich plates on the checkered blanket. "You're really doing this?" Daniel's eyes met hers. "I made a promise to make things right. I intend to keep it." The following Tuesday, Clara found a small potted plant on her desk at work. A tiny succulent in a ceramic pot, painted with colorful hearts. The card read, "To brighten your day, D.E." She learned that Daniel had taken Ellie shopping for it during their lunch break, letting her pick out both the plant and the pot. The thought of them conspiring together to surprise her made her smile all day. That evening, as they walked home from dinner at their now favorite family restaurant, Ellie skipped ahead, singing a song she'd learned at school. Daniel and Clara walked slower, comfortable in their shared silence. "Thank you for the plant," Clara said finally. "It was very thoughtful." "It was all Ellie's idea," Daniel replied. "She said your desk needed something living on it besides your coffee cup." Clara laughed. "She's not wrong." They reached the entrance to their temporary apartment, a modest but comfortable place Daniel had helped them find while the housing project was being completed. Ellie had already run inside to greet Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who often watched her after school. "Clara," Daniel said softly, touching her arm before she could follow. "I want you to know, these past few weeks, they've meant everything to me." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. The walls she'd built around her heart were crumbling, brick by brick, with every genuine smile, every kind gesture, every moment of proof that people could change. "They've meant a lot to us too," she whispered. Later that night, after stories and prayers and tucking Ellie into bed, Clara sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, smoothing back her hair. Ellie's room was filled with drawings, some from school, some from her art sessions with Daniel. They showed the three of them in various scenes. At the park, having ice cream, feeding ducks. "Mommy?" Ellie murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart? I'm happy we met Mr. Daniel. He makes you smile more." Clara leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet smell of her strawberry shampoo. As Ellie drifted off to sleep, Clara stayed there for a moment, looking at the peaceful face of her daughter. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that cold park bench to this warm room filled with love and possibility. Standing up quietly, she walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Her reflection smiled back at her, and she whispered to herself, "Maybe, just maybe." Clara's morning routine had become almost pleasant these past weeks. She'd grown used to walking past the newsstand on her way to work, exchanging cheerful greetings with Joe, the elderly vendor who always saved the morning paper for her. But today was different. Today, her steps faltered as she approached the stand, her coffee cup nearly slipping from suddenly numb fingers. There, splashed across the front page of the city's most notorious tabloid, was a photo of her and Ellie from that first night at the hotel. The headline screamed in bold letters, "CEO uses homeless mother and child as PR prop." Her hands trembled as she snatched up the paper. Joe tried to say something, but his words faded into background noise as her eyes scanned the article. Anonymous sources claimed Daniel had orchestrated the entire encounter, positioning himself to be seen helping a homeless family. The article suggested he'd even hired photographers to document the moment, turning their desperation into a calculated publicity stunt. The walk to Whitmore Enterprises felt like moving through thick fog. In the elevator, she noticed people glancing at her, then quickly looking away. Their whispers followed her down the hallway to her desk. "Did you see the paper? I heard he planned the whole thing." Poor thing, being used like that. Clara's cheeks burned as she sat at her reception desk, the morning's tasks blurring before her eyes. Each ring of the phone made her flinch. Each passing colleague's sympathetic look felt like a knife twist. By mid-morning, she couldn't take it anymore. She marched to Daniel's office, ignoring his assistant's protests. Daniel looked up from his desk, his face creasing with concern when he saw her expression. "Clara, I can explain. Explain what? She slammed the tabloid onto his desk. How you turned our worst moment into your best photo op. How you probably had someone following us, waiting for the perfect shot of the poor homeless mother and her little girl. Daniel stood, his face pale. That's not what happened. I would never. Save it. Clara's voice shook. I actually started to believe you'd changed, that you cared. But this whole time, we were just part of your redemption story, weren't we? The perfect props to fix your image? Clara, please listen. Daniel moved around his desk, reaching for her arm. She jerked away. I had nothing to do with this article. Someone's trying to... To what? Tell the truth? She laughed bitterly. You know what hurts the most? Ellie trusted you. She drew pictures of you. She told everyone at school about her friend Daniel. How am I supposed to explain this to her? Daniel's face crumpled. Ellie, she knows me better than that. You both do. No, I don't think we do. Clara pulled her employee badge from her blazer. I quit. Consider this my resignation, effective immediately. Please don't do this. Daniel's voice cracked. Let me fix this. I'll find out who leaked the story. You've fixed enough. She dropped the badge on his desk. Stay away from us. Clara walked out of his office with her head high, ignoring the stares and whispers. She gathered her few personal items from her desk, stuffing them into her purse with trembling hands. The framed photo of Ellie's drawing, the one with all three of them holding hands, caught her eye. She turned it face down and left it there. That evening, in their hotel room, Clara pulled out their old suitcase. Ellie sat cross-legged on the bed, watching with red-rimmed eyes as her mother packed their belongings. But I don't want to leave, Ellie whispered, clutching her teddy bear. This feels like home now. Clara paused, a shirt half folded in her hands. This was never meant to be permanent, sweetie. We need to stand on our own feet. Is this because of Daniel? Ellie's lower lip trembled. He didn't do those bad things people are saying. He couldn't have. Sometimes grown-ups aren't who we think they are. Clara zipped the suitcase closed, each click of the zipper feeling like a final door closing. Why can't we just stay with Daniel? Ellie pleaded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Clara sat beside her daughter, pulling her close. Because trust is harder to rebuild than walls. She kissed the top of Ellie's head, her own tears threatening to fall. Once it's broken, you can't just patch it up and pretend everything's okay. She looked around the hotel room that had become their temporary haven. The drawings Ellie had taped to the walls, the small potted plant Daniel had brought them, the stack of books they'd read together during evening story time. All of it had to be packed away. All of it had to be left behind, just like the trust she'd foolishly given to a man who'd seen them as nothing more than a convenient story. Clara stood, squaring her shoulders. Come on, sweetie, time to go. Where will we go? Ellie asked, sliding off the bed. I don't know yet, Clara admitted. But we'll figure it out. We always do. She took one last look at the room, at the life they'd started to build here. Then she picked up their suitcase, took Ellie's hand, and walked out, leaving behind not just a room, but a dream of what could have been. The city lights twinkled like distant stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Daniel's penthouse. He sat in his leather armchair, tie loosened and jacket discarded, a glass of untouched scotch on the side table. The evening shadows stretched across the plush carpet, matching his dark mood. His phone lay face down on his desk, still displaying the dozens of missed calls from his PR team. They wanted to get ahead of the story, to spin this the right way. But their corporate jargon felt hollow now. Everything felt hollow. Daniel ran his fingers through his normally perfectly styled hair, messing it up without care. The tabloid headline kept flashing in his mind. CEO uses homeless mother and child as PR prop. The words made his stomach turn. Worse still was the memory of Clara's face when she'd confronted him. Hurt, betrayal, and something that cut deeper than anger. Disappointment. I really messed up, he muttered to the empty room. His voice sounded strange in the silence. The penthouse had always been quiet, but tonight the silence felt oppressive. He stood up abruptly, pacing the length of his living room. The city spread out below him like a glittering carpet, all those lights representing homes and families. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably packing up their few belongings, ready to disappear from his life forever. The thought made his chest ache. Daniel loosened his tie further, feeling like he couldn't breathe. He'd spent years building walls around himself, protecting himself from the memories of his own childhood poverty. Now those walls felt like a prison. His eyes fell on a crayon, drawing Ellie had given him last week, proudly displayed on his otherwise pristine refrigerator. 3 stick figures holding hands. Mommy, Ellie, and Mr. Daniel. His throat tightened. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and dialed Martha Evans, the shelter director he'd been working with recently. "Mr. Whitmore," Martha's voice was surprised. "It's nearly 9 o'clock. I know. I'm sorry." Daniel's voice was rough. "I needed to talk about the housing project." There was a pause. "I saw the tabloid article," Martha said carefully. "The project stands," Daniel said firmly. "In fact, I want to accelerate it. How quickly can we break ground?" "Mr. Whitmore, are you sure? With all this negative press?" "I don't care about the press." The words came out sharper than he intended. He took a breath, softening his tone. "Martha, this isn't about PR. It never was. I need to do something real, something that matters." The shelter director was quiet for a moment. "The plans are ready. We could start within the week if you're serious." "I am." Daniel walked to his desk, pulling out the project folders he'd been reviewing. "And I want to expand. Not just one building. Let's look at 3. Different locations, different needs." That's incredible." Martha's voice wavered slightly. "But the cost? I'll cover it personally, if I have to." Daniel's jaw set with determination. "This isn't about money anymore." They spent the next hour going over details, locations, permits, contractors. Daniel took careful notes, his handwriting messier than usual, but his mind clearer than it had been all day. When he finally hung up, the city outside had grown darker, but the weight in his chest felt slightly lighter. He walked to the windows, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. "I'll prove it," he said aloud to his reflection, his voice firm with resolve. Not with words, but with actions. The words hung in the air of his empty penthouse. For the first time in his life, the success he'd surrounded himself with, the expensive furniture, the prestigious address, the corner office, felt meaningless. He'd built an empire of glass and steel, but he'd forgotten about the people who needed shelter more than luxury. His phone buzzed again, another call from his PR team. He declined it without hesitation. Let them worry about the headlines. He had real work to do. Daniel turned away from the window and headed to his home office. His laptop hummed to life as he sat down, opening emails and documents. The housing project files filled his screen. Blueprints, budgets, timelines. He'd review them all again, make sure everything was perfect. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his eyes drifted to Ellie's drawing again. He remembered her small hand in his, as she'd proudly explained each stick figure, the way Clara had smiled despite herself at her daughter's enthusiasm. The memory both warmed and hurt his heart. Daniel pulled up a new document and began typing. Not a press release or a corporate statement, but a simple list. Concrete actions he could take, starting tomorrow. Breaking ground on the housing projects was just the beginning. There were other ways to help, other wrongs to right. The city lights continued to twinkle outside his window as he worked into the night. For the first time in his career, Daniel Whitmore felt utterly powerless in the face of what truly mattered. But maybe, he thought, that powerlessness was exactly what he needed to feel. It was time to stop being the untouchable CEO and start being the person Ellie had drawn in her picture, someone worthy of holding hands with a family. The women's shelter stood in stark contrast to the luxury hotel they'd left behind. Paint peeled from the walls, and the narrow hallways echoed with footsteps and muffled conversations. Clara set their single suitcase on one of the twin beds in their shared room, trying to smile for Ellie's sake. "It's cozy," Clara said, smoothing the thin blanket on Ellie's bed. "And look, you can put your teddy right here on the windowsill." Ellie clutched her worn bear tighter, her lower lip trembling. "But I liked our other room better, and I miss." "I know, sweetie." Clara cut in quickly, not wanting to hear Daniel's name. "But this is temporary. We'll find a better place soon." The room was barely big enough for the 2 beds and a small dresser. A communal bathroom waited down the hall, and the kitchen they shared with 12 other families was always busy, but it was safe, and it was all they could afford right now. Clara found work cleaning houses, taking whatever job she could get through a local agency. Her hands grew rough from cleaning products, and her back ached each night, but she refused to let Ellie see her exhaustion. During the day, while Ellie was at school, Clara scrubbed floors and sanitized bathrooms in strangers' homes, holding back tears as she remembered her own apartment. "Mommy, look what I drew today," Ellie said one afternoon, pulling a crumpled paper from her backpack. Clara's heart clenched when she saw the crayon figures herself, Ellie and Daniel, all holding hands in front of what looked like a house. "That's very nice, sweetheart," Clara managed, her throat tight. "Miss Thompson said to draw our family," Ellie explained, smoothing the paper carefully. "I know Daniel's not really our family, but he felt like he could be. Don't you think so, Mommy?" Clara busied herself with folding laundry, blinking rapidly. "Sometimes things that feel right aren't meant to be, honey." But Ellie was persistent, as only a 7-year-old could be. She drew picture after picture, Daniel pushing her on a swing, all 3 of them having ice cream, scenes from memories that seemed to belong to another life now. Each drawing found its way onto their section of wall, creating a colorful collage of what might have been. The other shelter residents noticed. "Your girl's got quite the imagination," Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor, commented one evening as she helped Clara fold sheets in the laundry room. "She keeps talking about this Daniel fellow. Says he's going to build houses for everyone who needs one." Clara's hand stilled on the warm cotton. "She has a big heart, sometimes too big. And sometimes children see things more clearly than we do," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "They're not blinded by pride or fear." That night, after tucking Ellie into bed, Clara sat on her own narrow mattress, staring at the wall of drawings. The crayon figures smiled back at her, mocking her with their simple happiness. She thought of Daniel's face when she'd accused him of using them for publicity, the hurt in his eyes that seemed too real to be fake. Ellie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like, "Daddy." Clara's heart squeezed painfully. Was she thinking of her late father, or of Daniel? The question haunted her. When she was certain Ellie was deeply asleep, Clara slipped from her bed and knelt beside it. The rough carpet pressed into her knees as she clasped her hands together, something she hadn't done since her husband's death. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the shelter's nighttime sounds. "I need guidance. I thought I was protecting us, but—" Tears slid down her cheeks, dropping onto her folded hands. "What if I was wrong? What if I let my anger blind me? I don't know what to do anymore." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking at Ellie's peaceful face in the dim light filtering through the thin curtains. Her daughter deserved so much more than this. More than a shelter bed. More than a mother too scared to trust. More than crayon drawings of a family that could have been. "Help me see the truth," Clara prayed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Help me know what's right. Not just for me, but for Ellie. For all of us." The night pressed in around her, offering no immediate answers. But as she rose from her knees, Clara felt something shift inside her, not certainty, exactly, but perhaps the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. She carefully tucked Ellie's blanket more securely around her shoulders, then returned to her own bed. The wall of drawings seemed to glow softly in the darkness, like windows into a world that still might be possible, if only she could find the courage to believe in it. The autumn wind whipped through the narrow street as Clara stepped out of the women's shelter, clutching her thin jacket closer. She'd just finished another exhausting shift of cleaning offices, and her hands still smelled of bleach. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows between the buildings. She stopped dead in her tracks. There, getting out of his sleek black car, was Daniel Whitmore. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than she made in months, but his face looked drawn and tired. Their eyes met, and the air seemed to crackle with tension. "Clara," he said, taking a step forward. "Please, just let me explain about the article." "There's nothing to explain," Clara cut him off, her voice sharp. You used us. Made yourself look like some kind of savior while your company keeps pushing people out of their homes. Daniel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. That's not true. The article was a hit piece. I never... Never what? Clara's voice rose. Never meant for anyone to find out? Never thought about how it would affect us? She could feel curious eyes watching from the shelter windows, but she didn't care anymore. Everything I did was genuine, Daniel insisted, moving closer. The housing initiative, the foundation, it's all real. I'm trying to make things right. Right? Clara laughed bitterly. You can't just throw money at problems and expect them to go away. Do you know what it's like to explain to your child why people are whispering about you? Why they look at you with pity? I grew up poor too, Clara. I told you that. And now you're just like all the others who forgot where they came from. Their voices echoed off the brick walls. Neither noticed Ellie, who had been sitting on the shelter steps with her teddy bear, slowly stand up and walk away, her small shoulders hunched against their angry words. I haven't forgotten anything, Daniel said, his voice quieter but intense. Every decision I make now, I think about you and Ellie, about all the families like yours. Stop it, Clara snapped. Stop acting like you care about us. You're just trying to ease your conscience. That's not fair, and you know it. Daniel's professional facade cracked, revealing real hurt. I've changed. Why can't you see that? Because people like you don't change. Clara's words came out in a rush. You make promises, you pretend to care, and then you move on to the next project, the next PR opportunity. Meanwhile, people like me are left picking up the pieces. Their argument continued, bitter words flying back and forth like weapons. Clara's chest felt tight with anger and something else, something that felt dangerously like loss. Finally, Daniel stepped back, his face a mask of controlled emotion. I'll prove you wrong, Clara. Not with words, but with actions. Save it for someone who believes in fairy tales, Clara muttered, turning toward the shelter entrance. Ellie, honey, let's go inside. But the steps were empty. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Ellie? She looked around frantically. Ellie? The anger vanished instantly, replaced by rising panic. She was just here. She was sitting right here. Daniel's face paled. When did you last see her? Before we started arguing. Clara's hands shook as she ran into the shelter, calling Ellie's name. She checked their small room, the common area, the bathroom. Nothing. When she burst back outside, Daniel was already on his phone, alerting security teams and the police. Clara's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. We'll find her, Daniel assured her, but Clara barely heard him. She was already running down the street, screaming Ellie's name. Hours passed in a blur of searching. The police combed the area while Daniel's security team checked nearby streets and parks. Clara's throat was raw from calling out, and her feet ached, but she couldn't stop. The sky had grown dark when Daniel's phone rang. They've spotted someone matching her description, he said quickly. Near your old apartment building. Clara's heart clenched. Of course, the one place Ellie had truly called home. They raced there in Daniel's car, the streets a blur. The old building loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty, condemned signs plastered across the entrance. Construction equipment sat silent in the shadows, waiting to tear down more memories. And there, huddled on the crumbling front stoop, was a small figure clutching a teddy bear. Daniel reached her first, his long legs carrying him ahead of Clara. He dropped to his knees beside Ellie, who looked up with tear-stained cheeks. I just want to go home, she whispered, her voice small and broken. Without hesitation, Daniel gathered her into his arms, holding her close against his expensive suit. Ellie buried her face in his shoulder and began to sob deep, heart-wrenching cries that echoed off the empty building's walls. Clara stood frozen, watching as Daniel gently rocked her daughter, murmuring soft words of comfort. His own eyes glistened with tears in the streetlight. For the first time, Clara saw past his wealth, past her anger, past everything, and saw simply a man who cared, deeply and truly, about her little girl. I miss our home, Ellie hiccuped between sobs, still cradled in Daniel's arms. I miss when Mommy smiled. I miss everything. Clara moved forward on shaking legs, her own tears falling freely now. She knelt beside them on the cold concrete, one hand reaching out to stroke Ellie's hair, the other finding Daniel's shoulder for support. They stayed there, the three of them, holding each other in the growing darkness, while police lights flashed silently in the distance. Clara's heart pounded as she raced through the darkening streets. Her shoes slapped against the wet pavement and her breath came in ragged gasps. Every second away from Ellie felt like torture. When she finally turned the corner onto their old street, she stumbled to a stop. There, beneath the shadow of their condemned apartment building, sat Daniel on the crumbling front steps. He cradled Ellie in his arms, wrapped in his expensive suit jacket. The little girl's face was tear-stained but peaceful as she dozed against his chest. "Ellie!" Clara called out, her voice cracking. Daniel looked up, his face etched with relief. "She's okay," he said softly, careful not to wake the exhausted child. "Just cold and scared." Clara rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside them on the dirty steps. Her hands trembled as she brushed Ellie's tangled hair from her face. "Baby, why did you run away like that?" Ellie stirred, blinking up at her mother with red-rimmed eyes. "I heard you fighting," she whispered. "I wanted to come home." "Oh, sweetheart." Clara gathered her daughter into her arms, holding her close. The familiar scent of Ellie's shampoo mixed with the musty air around the old building. "This isn't our home anymore." "But it was the last place we were happy," Ellie said, her voice small and broken. "Before Daddy died. Before everything got sad." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. She looked up at Daniel, who hadn't moved from his spot on the steps. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled. Tie loosened, shirt wrinkled, mud on his knees from kneeling to comfort Ellie. "I found her sitting here alone," Daniel said quietly. "She was singing that lullaby you always sing to her." His voice grew thick with emotion. "The same one my mother used to sing to me when we lived in our car." Clara watched as Daniel's composed facade cracked. In the fading light, she saw not the powerful CEO, but a man haunted by his own past. "I've been trying so hard to fix everything with money and buildings," he continued, running a hand through his messed hair. "But that's not what any of us really needs, is it?" Ellie reached out and took Daniel's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "I just want us to stop being sad," she said. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "When I was your age, Ellie, my mom and I lost our home too. We had nothing. No money. No place to go. I promised myself I'd never be poor again." He took a shaky breath. "But in trying to keep that promise, I forgot what it felt like to be on the other side. I became the very thing that once hurt me." Clara felt her anger beginning to soften as she watched Daniel's shoulders shake. This wasn't the calculated speech of a businessman. This was raw truth, pulled from a place of deep pain. "The housing project isn't just about buildings," Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "It's about giving people like us, like who we used to be, a chance at stability, a chance at family." He looked directly at Clara, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I want to build something real, something that lasts. Not just apartments, but community, connection." He swallowed hard. "Family. The tabloid," Clara started, but Daniel shook his head. "Was a twisted version of the truth. Yes, I helped you that first night because your situation moved me. But everything since then?" He gestured between them. "The dinners, the conversations, watching Ellie grow? That wasn't for show. That was real. That was me finally remembering what matters." Ellie shifted in Clara's arms, looking between the two adults. "Can we be a family?" she asked softly. "Like in my drawings?" Clara felt her heart twist. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly, the vulnerable set of his shoulders. This wasn't the polished CEO who had first helped them. This was a man who had found his way back to his own humanity through love. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes," Daniel said quietly. "But I can promise that everything I do from now on will be to protect and cherish what we've found here. If you'll let me." The street had grown dark around them, the old building looming like a shadow of their past. But here, on these worn steps, Clara felt something shift inside her. The wall she'd built around her heart began to crack. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and placed her hand over Daniel's where it still held Ellie's. The warmth of the connection spread through her cold fingers. It wasn't forgiveness yet. That would take time. But it was a beginning. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Whitmore Enterprises conference room as Daniel stood before a sea of reporters. His usual crisp suit felt different today, less like armor and more like a symbol of the change he wanted to bring. "Today marks a new chapter," Daniel announced, his voice steady and clear. "The Whitmore Foundation for Community Housing will dedicate itself to creating affordable homes for families in need." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "And, to show our commitment, I'm personally stepping back from aggressive development practices that have hurt our communities." Camera flashes erupted as reporters scribbled furiously. In the back of the room, Clara watched with Ellie beside her, their hands clasped together. Ellie bounced on her toes, beaming with pride. "Furthermore," Daniel continued, "I'm pledging half of my personal wealth to this initiative. More flashes, more furious writing. Because success isn't just about profit, it's about people." After the press conference, Clara found Daniel in his office, loosening his tie. "That was quite an announcement," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Daniel smiled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "I meant every word." "I know you did." Clara stepped inside, Ellie skipping behind her. "That's why I've decided to accept your offer." 2 weeks later, Clara sat at her new desk in the Foundation's offices, reviewing applications from families in need. She recognized their stories in every form: the desperate hope, the struggle for dignity. Her own experience had become a compass, helping her guide the Foundation's efforts. "Mrs. Martinez needs help with her deposit," Clara explained during a meeting with Daniel. "She's working 2 jobs, has 3 kids, and her landlord's raising the rent again." Daniel nodded, no longer the distant CEO but a partner in this mission. "Let's make it happen." "And what about the Williams family?" "Already approved. They move in next week." Clara smiled, remembering their tears of joy. The Foundation grew quickly, transforming empty lots into homes, abandoned buildings into community centers. Clara's insight proved invaluable. She knew firsthand what families needed most. At Ellie's school, things were changing too. Her art now hung proudly on the classroom walls, drawings of happy families in colorful houses. Her teacher noticed the difference in her smile, the confidence in her voice. "My mom helps people find homes," Ellie told her class during show and tell, "and Daniel, he makes sure everyone has a chance to have one." She held up her latest drawing, stick figures of herself, Clara, and Daniel standing before a row of rainbow-colored houses. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Daniel suggested dinner at their favorite family restaurant, the small Italian place where they'd first shared a meal together. Ellie claimed her usual spot in the corner booth, Clara sliding in beside her. "Remember when you wouldn't even look at me across the office?" Daniel teased, settling in across from them. Clara laughed, shaking her head. "Remember when you thought expensive suits made you important?" "They still do," he protested, but his eyes twinkled. "They're just not the most important thing anymore." Ellie giggled, reaching for the breadsticks. "Can we get extra cheese on everything?" "Extra cheese it is," Daniel agreed, winking at Clara. "Your mom can't say no to that face either." The waiter brought their usual orders: spaghetti for Ellie, eggplant parmesan for Clara, and chicken marsala for Daniel. They shared bites of each other's dishes, talked about their day, and made plans for the weekend. "The Martinez family gets their keys tomorrow," Clara mentioned between bites. "Ellie, want to help me welcome them?" "Can we bring cookies?" Ellie asked, twirling pasta around her fork. "Like Mrs. Peterson brought us?" Daniel watched them, his heart full. This was what success really felt like. Not the numbers in his bank account or the height of his buildings, but the joy of sharing a simple meal with people who had become his family. As they finished their tiramisu, Ellie insisting on 3 spoons to share, laughter filled their corner of the restaurant. It wasn't the forced laughter of business dinners or the hollow echo of his old solitary meals. This was real, warm, and full of love. "You've got chocolate on your nose," Clara told Ellie, reaching over with a napkin. "Daniel has some too," Ellie pointed, giggling. He crossed his eyes trying to see it, making them both laugh harder. In that moment, surrounded by the people he loved, Daniel realized he'd found something far more valuable than all his previous success. He'd found his true home. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the new brick building of the Hope Residences. A crowd had gathered on the freshly laid sidewalk, their excited chatter filling the crisp morning air. A large red ribbon stretched across the entrance, fluttering in the gentle breeze. Clara stood near the podium, fidgeting with the note cards in her hands. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but professional and dignified. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and though her hands trembled slightly, her eyes shone with pride and purpose. Daniel stood off to the side, watching her with quiet admiration. He'd traded his usual designer suits for a more modest dark blue blazer and khakis. Ellie bounced excitedly beside him in her favorite yellow dress, her small hand wrapped tightly in his. "Look at all the people, Daniel," Ellie whispered loudly, pointing at the growing crowd. "They're here to see our new building." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "They sure are, sweetheart. And they're here to see your mom speak too." The shelter director, Mrs. Martinez, stepped up to the microphone first. "Good morning, everyone. Today marks a new chapter in our community's story. The Hope Residences isn't just a building, it's a promise kept, a dream realized." Clara took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. She glanced at Daniel and Ellie, drawing strength from their encouraging smiles. When Mrs. Martinez called her name, Clara walked to the podium with steady steps. "6 months ago," Clara began, her voice clear and strong despite her nervousness, "I sat on a park bench with my daughter, wondering where we would sleep that night. We had lost everything: our home, our security, our hope." She paused, meeting the eyes of several people in the crowd who nodded in understanding. But sometimes, hope comes from unexpected places. Her gaze found Daniel's, and she smiled softly. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to find what truly matters. This building represents more than just affordable housing. It represents second chances, fresh starts, and the power of transformation. In the crowd, several former shelter residents wiped away tears. They knew Clara's story because it was their story too. "The Hope Residences will provide homes for 30 families, Clara continued, her voice growing stronger. 30 families who won't have to wonder where they'll sleep tonight. 30 children who won't have to ask why they can't go home." She glanced at Ellie, who beamed back at her. But most importantly, this building stands as proof that change is possible, not just in bricks and mortar, but in hearts and minds too. Clara's eyes met Daniel's again, and this time they held a warmth that made his heart skip. The crowd burst into applause as Clara stepped back from the podium. Daniel moved forward, leading Ellie by the hand. The large scissors gleamed in the morning sun as he lifted them. "Would you like to help me cut the ribbon, Ellie?" Daniel asked, kneeling down to her level. Ellie nodded enthusiastically, her pigtails bouncing. "Can Mommy help too?" Daniel extended his other hand toward Clara, who stepped forward to join them. Together, they positioned the scissors on the ribbon. Daniel's hand steady on the handle, Ellie's small fingers wrapped around his, and Clara's hand resting gently over both of theirs. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as they cut through the red ribbon. The crowd cheered, but Daniel barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the little girl beside him and the woman whose touch sent warmth through his entire being. As the ribbon floated to the ground, Ellie tugged on Daniel's sleeve. He leaned down, and she cupped her hands around his ear, whispering the words that made his heart swell. "Now we can go home." Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes as he looked at Ellie's innocent, joyful face. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Home wasn't his lonely penthouse or his executive office. Home wasn't even this beautiful new building they'd created. Home was right here, in Ellie's trusting smile, in Clara's gentle touch, in the love that had grown between them all. For the first time in his life, Daniel Whitmore truly understood what it meant to belong somewhere, to someone. The first tear escaped, rolling down his cheek as he smiled at Ellie. The cameras kept flashing, capturing this unguarded moment of emotion from the normally stoic CEO. But Daniel didn't care about maintaining his image anymore. He had found something far more precious than reputation or success. He had found his home. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Clara Dawson, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.